For years, the disappearance of June Whitaker remained one of the strangest unsolved cases in the quiet town of Alder Creek. A middle-aged librarian who lived alone, had no enemies, and seemed content with her quiet routines, June vanished on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in 2015. She never returned from her lunch break. Her small red hatchback was found parked behind the town library. The keys were still in the ignition. Her purse, wallet, and favorite worn-out cardigan were on the passenger seat. Untouched. Alder Creek's population hovered just under 5,000. News traveled fast there, and whispers about June's fate filled diners, gas stations, and school corridors. Some believed she'd simply left town, overwhelmed by years of solitude. Others speculated about something darker, a stalker, maybe even a serial killer. But after months of searching and years of silence, the case grew cold. That is, until a cardboard box arrived at the library loading dock one morning in late autumn 6 years, after June had vanished. Mara, a high school senior and volunteer at the Alder Creek Library, was the first to open the box. The note taped on the top read, "Books from my late father's estate. Thought the library might like them." It was unsigned. Mara opened the box expecting the usual old encyclopedias, dusty romance novels, perhaps a Bible or two. But what she found made her pause. The books were mostly gardening manuals, some dated back to the 1960s. Between the pages of a tattered botanical guide, Mara found something strange. Pressed between the brittle pages of a chapter on wildflowers was a lavender stem, dry and delicate. But tucked under it was a hand-drawn map. Faint pencil lines showed a path through the woods behind Alder Creek's old greenhouse, which had been abandoned for over a decade. At the bottom, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Where the violets bloom, she waits." Mara blinked. She glanced around. No one was nearby, just the quiet hum of the library's central heating. The box didn't seem sinister, but something about that note and that pressed flower made her stomach twist. She quietly folded the map and slipped it into her bag. By that evening, Mara had done some digging. The greenhouse on the map was once part of the town's botanical conservatory, owned by the eccentric Delaney family, particularly its patriarch, Thomas Delaney, a retired botanist who had lived there alone for years. He had passed away in a nursing home 3 years ago. His name had appeared only once in the local paper, his obituary. Feeling uneasy, Mara showed the map to her mother, who immediately recognized the handwriting. "That's June Whitaker's," she said, her voice low. "I used to check out books from her. She always made notes in pencil, on slips of paper. That's her style. Those little curls at the end of the letters." The next day, Mara brought the book and map to the local police station. Detective Elsie Raymond, the same investigator who had worked the original missing persons case, sat in stunned silence as she examined the contents. "We've had nothing for years," she murmured. "And now this." Within 24 hours, the map was scanned, analyzed, and verified to lead directly to the overgrown path behind the abandoned Delaney greenhouse. A search team was assembled immediately. June's sister Claire received the call later that evening. She had moved away from Alder Creek. After her sister's disappearance, unable to bear the town's unchanging quiet, she now lived 3 hours away and hadn't stepped foot in Alder Creek in almost 4 years. But when she heard what the officers had found, she didn't hesitate. The next morning, she packed a bag and headed for the town that had haunted her. Dreams for years. The old greenhouse sat hidden behind a dense curtain of evergreens, about half a mile into the woods. It had once been a source of pride for the Delaney family. Exotic flowers, imported soil, rare plants. Thomas Delaney had spared no expense. But after a storm collapsed part of the structure in 2009, the town didn't have the budget to repair or maintain it. Nature reclaimed it. The structure was left to rot. Asterisk, as Detective Raymond and her team approached the site, they noted the strange quiet. Despite being late autumn, the air was unusually warm and damp. A glass panel, blackened, with mold, cracked underfoot as they stepped inside. The wooden frame of the greenhouse groaned softly. Asterisk, the smell hit them first, not decay exactly, but something stale, wet, and earthy. Inside, among shattered pots and broken benches, were vines that had grown wild, twisting around beams like the fingers of a sleeping giant. Asterisk, behind a rusted work table, someone gasped. "Over here," an officer said quietly. Asterisk, what they found was a large plastic tarp covered in moss. Beneath its skeletal remains, partially clothed in librarian attire, a library ID badge lay nearby, caked in soil. June Whitaker. It was her dot asterisk next. To the body was a canvas tote bag containing books, a thermos, and what appeared to be a set of handwritten journals sealed in Ziploc bags. Dozens of them. Asterisk. Detective Raymond knelt, lifting the nearest journal. On the front, in neat handwriting, was the date, July 15th, 2015. Lunch break. Claire arrived an hour later. Just as the evidence collection began, the greenhouse had become a crime scene. But Claire couldn't look away, not from the ivy-covered glass, or from the bag she knew June had taken to work every single day. Asterisk, she stood beside the police tape, arms crossed, her lips trembling. Asterisk, she was here all this time, she whispered. Asterisk, Detective Raymond put a hand on her shoulder. We don't know the full story yet. But this, she held up the bag of journals. This might finally tell us what happened to her. The first pages of June Whitaker's journal were ordinary, mundane, even. Notes about library inventory, a reminder to buy cat food, thoughts about a new gardening book she'd been cataloging. But by the fifth entry, the tone began to shift. She wrote about a man named Mr. D. He came in again today. Left another sunflower on the counter when I wasn't looking. He never checks out books, just walks around, watches the orchids on the windowsill. Detective Raymond flipped through several entries, each growing more unsettling. June never wrote his full name, but the pattern was clear. Mr. D had become a regular visitor at the library. He lingered for hours. He asked about June's favorite flowers. He offered her a jar of honey from his beehive. He invited her to visit the greenhouse. And then, I finally went today. I shouldn't have, he insisted. Said he had a rare flower I'd love. The greenhouse is breathtaking. But something about the way he locked the door behind me made me uneasy. Claire couldn't read anymore. She stepped outside the greenhouse, where the cold November air felt like a slap. For years, she had imagined hundreds of ways her sister might have died lost in the woods, attacked by a stranger, perhaps even starting over with a secret new life. But this? Lured into a trap by a lonely man who had quietly stalked her for months? Back inside, Raymond read aloud to the team. He says he's not lonely, just misunderstood. That the town cast him out after the greenhouse was abandoned. I nodded. I didn't know what to say. I just want to leave now. But the door, it's always locked now. And when I ask for my phone, he changes the subject. Detectives recovered a dozen journals in all, dated over several months, July through November 2015. That meant June had been alive in the greenhouse for weeks, maybe longer. The thought made Claire's knees buckle. One journal was almost completely blank, save for one final note scrawled across a torn page. Someone will find me. I left the map. I hope someone finds the map. Mara, the high school volunteer, was brought in again. She'd been the first to discover the book. Detective Raymond asked her where the box had come from. Mara pointed to the note, "From my late father's estate. Thought the library might like them." Handwriting analysis showed it didn't match Mr. Delaney's records. In fact, it matched that of his daughter, Elise Delaney, who hadn't lived in Alder Creek in years. Elise Delaney had grown up in that greenhouse. After her mother's death, in 2003, she left town and cut ties with her father. But in 2018, when Thomas Delaney began to show signs of dementia, Elise returned quietly. She never filed for guardianship, but helped manage his affairs, including overseeing the estate after his death in 2020. No one in Alder Creek saw her during that time. She didn't attend her father's funeral, and she sold off the property under a shell company. But when police searched deed transfer records and delivery logs, her name reappeared. Detective Raymond, accompanied by 2 officers, arrived at Elise's home in nearby Brighton. A modest bungalow, curtains drawn, front garden overgrown. When Elise opened the door, her expression was strangely calm. "You're here about the box," she said. Inside, the house was sterile. Sparse furniture, bookshelves with botanical volumes, a dusty terrarium on the windowsill. "I didn't mean for it to lead to anything," Elise said quietly. "I found the journals a year ago. I thought they were just ramblings. I didn't read them fully, just skimmed. I assumed my father was imagining things. Raymond didn't." "Believe her, not entirely. You didn't think it strange that your father was hiding handwritten journals written by a missing woman?" "I didn't want to believe it," Elise admitted. "And I didn't want to get involved. I thought maybe if I just donated the books anonymously, someone else would do the right thing. That someone had been Mara. I'm sorry." Elise added, not making eye contact. "Truly, I didn't hurt her. I just didn't stop him." Officers searched Elise's house. Inside a small chest in the attic, they found personal effects. A silver bracelet engraved with June's initials, a torn library card, and most damning of all audio cassette tapes. They were labeled by date, July through October 2015. Raymond and her team played them back at the station. June's voice was unmistakable, soft, calm, measured. She was reading passages from books aloud. Each tape ended the same way, with a low male voice commenting, complimenting her voice, telling her he liked this one better than yesterday. The final tape was silence. With the physical evidence, the map, the journals, and the tapes, police were finally able to confirm what had long been suspected. June Whitaker hadn't run away. She had been held captive for months by Thomas Delaney in his decaying greenhouse. The question now became, why had no one noticed? Detective Raymond began reviewing June's case file from 2015. Several disturbing oversights surfaced. No search had been conducted of the greenhouse. It had been deemed structurally unsafe. Thomas Delaney had never been interviewed formally. His age and reputation as a harmless recluse had made him a low priority. The last library checkout record showed June had left the building at 12:21 p.m. The camera at the back entrance had been malfunctioning that day. Claire was furious. She was right here, she told the press, half a mile from downtown, dying while the entire town was guessing she'd taken off for a new life. She never left. In the following days, the greenhouse was demolished. Claire requested her sister's remains be cremated and buried beneath a wildflower garden in front of the library, space June had always wanted to beautify. The town approved the memorial unanimously. At this point, the case appeared closed. June's story, tragic as it was, had an ending. But Detective Raymond couldn't shake one detail that felt out of place. The map. If June had drawn it and hidden it in a book, how did it end up in Elise's possession? Why had the book with the map not been found earlier? And more curiously, why? Now, Raymond returned to the greenhouse one last time, walking the perimeter. Ivy still clung to the fence. She stared at the spot where June's journals had been hidden and noticed something else. A small, rusted garden spade stuck between the boards of an old bench. Wrapped around its handle was twine and what looked like another folded note. Detective Raymond approached the garden spade cautiously. The note wrapped around the handle was yellowed and fragile. She slipped on gloves, untied the twine, and unfolded the paper with care. The handwriting was messy, hurried, unlike June's. Journal entries. It read, "If you're reading this, it means you found her. I didn't know what to do. I was just a kid. I didn't want to lie, but he made me promise. Please forgive me." E.D. It wasn't Elise's handwriting. It belonged to her son. Elise Delaney had never mentioned having children. But in the hospital intake records from her father's final year, Detective Raymond found a note. Visited by Elise D. and minor child. That child, now a teenager, had been living with his aunt since Elise's arrest. Raymond requested an interview. The boy Connor was pale and nervous. He kept his eyes on the table, fidgeting with the sleeves of his sweatshirt. When asked about the greenhouse, he hesitated. "I used to go there with Grandpa sometimes. He told me not to talk about it." "Did you ever see someone else there?" Raymond asked gently. Connor nodded. "A lady. She was nice. She read books out loud." His voice cracked. "I thought she was his girlfriend or something. But one time she asked me if I had a phone. She said she needed help. Grandpa got really mad." Raymond listened quietly as Connor confessed what he'd kept buried for years. He was only 9 at the time. He didn't understand what was happening, only that his grandfather had someone staying in the greenhouse and that he was never to talk about it. But the day he saw the woman crying behind the glass, asking for help, he panicked. Later, when his grandfather wasn't looking, he sneaked back and June passed him the folded map. "I didn't know what to do with it, so I hid it in a book, one of Grandpa's. He said he'd be donating some to the library after he died. I just hoped someone would find it." That one act by a terrified child was what had broken the case open 6 years later. Raymond thanked him and arranged for victim support counseling. Connor would not be charged. He had saved June's memory in the only way he could. Back at the police station, Claire sat in the evidence room, sorting through June's belongings. She found a few things that brought tears. A cat keychain, a broken hair clip from high school, a pressed daisy inside her notebook. But one item stood out: a library copy of Wuthering Heights, June's favorite book. Tucked inside was a Polaroid. The photo was grainy, but it showed June standing in the greenhouse. Her smile was forced. A man stood beside her, Thomas Delaney. But it was the object in his hand that drew Claire's attention. A chain with a key. The same key they'd found in Elise's attic, labeled Storage 3. That key opened a locker at a self-storage facility just outside of town. The unit had been under a business name, Flora Tempest, registered by Delaney in 2007. Inside, police found boxes of items, cassette tapes, worn notebooks, and dozens of photographs. Each featured women, sometimes at the library, sometimes walking downtown, always candid, always alone. June wasn't the first woman Delaney had followed. Raymond's team cross-referenced the women in the photos. Most were unharmed, but 3 had gone missing from neighboring towns between 2004 and 2011. Their cases had never been solved. Suddenly, June's case wasn't just a tragedy, it was part of a pattern. Delaney had used the greenhouse to isolate and observe. June was the only one who left behind enough evidence to expose the truth. A week after the storage unit was cleared, Claire asked to visit the site of the greenhouse one last time before it was turned into a community garden. She brought a mirror from June's old house. It had hung in her bedroom for years, an antique frame shaped like climbing vines. She placed it on the stump near where June's remains had been found. "I don't want her remembered just for how she died," Claire said to the volunteers preparing the land. She loved this place, loved what it could be. The community agreed. Plans were approved for the Whitaker Wildflower Garden, a public space filled with June's favorite blooms: lavender, violets, foxglove, and forget-me-nots. And at its center, the mirror stood as a tribute, a place for reflection literally and metaphorically. An engraved plaque read, "For June Whitaker, who never stopped believing someone would find her." Back in her cell, Elise Delaney finally agreed to a full confession. It wasn't out of guilt, it was out of frustration. The walls were closing in, and she wanted her version told. "I didn't know at first," she began, "but I suspected. When I came back to help my father, he kept referring to someone named Lark. That was June's nickname in his journals. He said she sang like a bird, always reading poetry, always smiling." Elise's face twisted with disdain. "He'd watch her for months, said she needed someone to protect her, someone who appreciated her. I thought it was creepy, but harmless. Then I found her scarf, then the books, and the map." Detective Raymond remained quiet, letting Elise fill the silence. "I knew what he'd done. I didn't want to be dragged into it. I had Connor to think about. You could have called us." "I couldn't. I didn't trust what it would do to Connor, or to me." Raymond leaned forward. "So you chose silence." Elise met her eyes. "Yes, and if that girl hadn't found the book, I'd still be silent." "Your silence was complicity," Raymond said. "I know." She didn't ask for forgiveness. Meanwhile, Mara, the high school volunteer who had found the book, was invited to speak at a memorial for June. She stood nervously before a crowd gathered beneath a soft October sky. "I didn't know Miss Whitaker," she began, "but she believed someone would find her. She left a map. She trusted that even after all that time, someone would still be looking. And she was right." Alder Creek was never quite the same after June Whitaker's story became known. In small towns, people pride themselves on knowing everyone's business, but June's suffering, her captivity just minutes from Main Street, proved how easily things could be missed or ignored. The media frenzy that followed unearthed uncomfortable truths. News vans crowded the street outside the library. Satellite trucks blocked traffic near the old greenhouse site. Reporters asked questions the town wasn't ready to answer. Why wasn't the greenhouse searched back in 2015? Why had Thomas Delaney never been questioned? How many warning signs had the town looked past? Detective Raymond, though hardened by years on the force, struggled privately with guilt. She had led the original search for June. She had accepted the theory that June left willingly. She had trusted Delaney's public image, that of a quiet, grief-stricken widower obsessed with plants. "I should have pushed harder," she admitted. To Claire one afternoon, standing in the finished garden that now bore June's name, Claire didn't respond with anger. She simply nodded. "We all should have." The Whitaker Wildflower Garden officially opened on the first Saturday of spring. Hundreds gathered for the dedication ceremony. Some brought flowers, others brought tears. Claire stood at the center, beside the stone marker with June's name etched into it. The community had raised funds to add benches, a water feature, and a reading nook. Volunteers from the library organized a small lending shelf at the edge of the garden filled with June's favorite books. Mara, now graduating high school, was chosen to cut the ribbon. Before doing so, she turned to the crowd and spoke. "This place isn't just for mourning. It's for remembering, for listening, for paying attention to the people who seemed quiet. June Whitaker didn't disappear because no one cared. She disappeared because people assumed. That won't happen. Again, not here. The ribbon fell. The applause was gentle, reverent. The garden had become something sacred. Months passed. The news cycle moved on. The wildflowers bloomed. At the Alder Creek Library, June's legacy continued. A special shelf was added, June's Picks, with handwritten notes about her favorite authors, discovered from her journals. Her desk remained untouched, now encased in glass, like a museum exhibit. The chair she once sat in bore a small plaque, reserved for Miss Whitaker, librarian, reader, fighter. Children sat on the floor beside it for story hour. Teenagers studied there late into the evening. For many, it felt like she was still watching over the space she had once cherished. Claire donated the remaining journals to the town's historical society. Though some pages were too painful to display, others contained reflections worth preserving. People don't have to shout to be noticed. Sometimes all we need is for someone to ask how we're doing and actually listen. Those words became the unofficial motto of the library staff. Every new employee read June's journals as part of training. Elise Delaney eventually pled guilty to obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and accessory to unlawful confinement. Her sentence included 10 years, with possibility of parole after 6. Her son, Connor, remained under the care of his aunt and continued therapy. Detective Raymond made sure Connor's actions, however delayed, were recognized. The note he had left wrapped around that garden spade, the map he'd hidden in the book, the truth he finally told, all of it mattered. Thomas Delaney, though long deceased, was posthumously connected to 3 additional disappearances. With the evidence from the storage locker, families from nearby towns finally received closure. The greenhouse had been more than a prison for June. It had been a serial predator's trophy room. The state legislature, moved by June's story, passed the Whitaker Act, a bill requiring that all missing adult cases remain open for review for a minimum of 10 years, with mandatory physical rechecks of properties previously dismissed. It was June's legacy at work, protecting others even in her absence. 6 months after the garden's dedication, Claire received a package, no return address. Inside was an envelope, sealed in wax, marked simply, "To be read when the garden blooms." Inside was a letter, written in June's neat, looping cursive. It must have been tucked among her journals and set aside by mistake, or maybe by design. Claire read aloud as the sun rose over the garden. "To whoever finds this, if you're reading my words, then I wasn't forgotten. That's all I ever wanted, not to be erased, not to be a whisper that fades in the wind. I don't know if I'll be found in time, but if I'm not, please know I tried. I kept hope alive. I left a map, I left my story, because I believe in people. I believe someone will always care enough to follow the breadcrumbs. Please tell my sister I love her. Please tell the town I forgive them. And please plant something for me. Something purple. With hope, June." Claire folded the letter slowly and pressed it to her chest. Around her, the garden shimmered in morning light. Lavender, violets, lupins, all blooming, all purple. In time, Alder Creek became a symbol not of tragedy, but of resilience. Schools taught June's story during Library Week. The greenhouse's story became a warning about complacency and the danger of ignoring quiet cries. Book clubs across the country read a biography written about her, titled "Where the Violets Bloom." And visitors who came to Alder Creek Passing, through on long road trips, searching for peace or chasing curiosity, would always stop at the garden. They'd read the plaque. They'd sit on the bench. And maybe, just maybe, they'd leave a flower tucked beside the mirror. A flower for June.